Hi, this is Professor Favors with American Literature. So, the topic today is Understanding Realism, and this is in connection to William Dean Howells' work titled Editha. And so, we're going to get into it, and then the second part of the presentation focuses on the Spanish American War as well as Editha. So, let's get started. All right, this presentation is subject to fair use. Now let's look at the realistic method. And understanding the realistic method is understanding the literary concept of realism, which is in opposition to romanticism. All right, let's look at the review of the differences. This is just a quick bullet point. So for romantic writing, this presents life as we would have it be, versus realism writing presents life as we would have it be. So for romantic writing, it focuses on the fantastical, the adventurous, the heroic versus actual. So we're looking at the ideal of the person versus the reality of the person. For realism, it is real versus fantastical. It is an accurate imitation of life as it is, what you will see in the readings, truth and fiction. And then it focuses on the ordinary citizen. It looks at the actual life of the person. So that's your differences between romantic writing and realism writing. So realism divine sets it is set between 1870 and 1910, so that's 19th to 20th century. Realism is defined as the representation and depiction of objects, actions, and social conditions as they are versus idealization. There is an emphasis on the everyday familiar experiences. Realism is also influenced by the Civil War, so it's not set within the Civil War, of course, but there are influences. So when you read some of the literary writings post Civil War, a lot of times the narrator or the main character uh, will refer to the previous war, and we see this in Editha. Realistic writers depict the way the world is and was at a particular time in history, emphasizing the experiences of middle class and working class locales and regions. Realistic writing typically focuses on the human cost of the American Civil War. So, as much as there was this survival mode to endure the war, now you have to deal with the repercussions of those experiences. Sample writer includes Tom Sawyer's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Now, there are some factors leading to realism as a literary strategy, and this is post Civil War. So, let's look at a few key events, key concepts. America moved into the industrial age, which unified the nation. Immigration from Europe and Asia provided cheap labor opportunities to growing urban centers in the Northwest and Midwest. Remember, this is during the time of the Emancipation Proclamation or after the Emancipation Proclamation, which opened the doors for immigration. There was a rise in the middle class. Women argued for the right to vote, to own property, and to earn a living. Now, that didn't happen actually. This is a precursor to it, but it didn't happen until the 19th Amendment, 1920, I think. African Americans rose in social and political prominence, arguing for social equality and the right to vote. Now, remember, the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote over white women. And that wasn't necessarily the purpose, but it there is a referencing to prohibiting racial discrimination. Women couldn't vote at all, whether the woman was black or white. But this right to vote likely means from black women or non-white women. Workers wanted better factory conditions, lobbying for better working conditions, and creating unions. Free public schools opened around the nation. Activists and reformers battled injustice. And this is a key point. Literary writers observed contemporary society and social issues for writing material. So now we are, if you remember, Romanticism and just an overview of American literature derives from the British ideal or the British literary tradition. Now, American writers, literary writers, are now focusing on the experiences of the American. It's still early America, but it's uh, post Civil War. We're heading into Reconstruction, Emancipation, Proclamation, etc. So now the focus is less on the mother country, right, in a sense, and now on where we are presently. And so this is why you want to pay attention to literature written during the time of the American Civil War or during the time of early America, because it gives you insight into what was going on at that time. All right, the realistic method, literary writers responding to the current issues of the day. And here's how they did it. So, the realistic method is defined as writers creating characters and plot narratives based on the everyday person experiencing common everyday life issues. This is called referential narrative. Okay, so characters resemble ordinary people living in middle class, working class, ordinary circumstances. They experience real life struggles. They also feel unable to resolve their conflicts. A lot of times, conflicts could be economic, financial, and social. And then, of course, class based. They use ordinary speech and dialogue. It is an indicator of their social class. They form the plot by exploring and working through a particular issue or struggle. So usually when you're writing, you are always writing with a goal in mind for a particular character, and then the antagonist or any of the supporting characters will either support that goal or oppose that goal. They drive the plot of the story. They tend to be three-dimensional in realistic fiction. They are revealed through an omniscient narrator who is objective and revealing their inner lives. In some ways, I believe the narrator can be biased, but a lot of times it's sort of like the person with a bird's eye view looking at the characters at play. Realistic fiction show, not just tell. You'll hear this in filmmaking, screenwriting for filmmaking, that create the language in such a way that you're not telling the reader or the viewer what is going on, you're showing them. So realists who are interested in contemporary life often set their fiction in real places. That could be a particular place and or region. The accuracy of detail to convey truth in fiction. They also believe that reality must be verifiable. They believe that the author must show and not just tell. That is the author's function in fictional writing. The narrative tells itself with low authorial intrusion. Okay. In other words, it's not the author saying, "Hey, I'm telling you that I'm about to tell you about this character." Instead, the author will give you such a description of the character that the character jumps off the page in a visual sense. They avoid sentimentality and forced emotional appeals. So we have three most prominent practitioners of realistic writing, which is Mark Twain, the comic realist, William Dean Howells, which is the subject of our study, social realist, and then Henry James, the psychological realist. So there are two extensions of realism, which are considered literary style contributors. So that's local color and then regionalism. So let's look at both. So the first contributor to realism is local color, which is set after the Civil War, of course, 1865 to 1885. And it is a method realists use to help readers see the setting, which may be a particular locality. They reveal habits, customs, religious influences, dress, fashion, favorite foods, language, dialect, and common experiences to the character and the people of the surrounding area. So if you look at it like this, Some of these people who write about a particular region, like Appalachia or the South or the North or the Midwest, they choose a particular city and state that has a lot of texture, in terms of visually thinking about the area. And then there are always these little towns with a little sheriff office and a mailbox, a mail center, and then there's a couple sitting on a bench outside of the diner, right? It's all of those little details that are that are incorporated into the concept of local color. Local color writers explore the narrative from the perspective of the outsider, who is often a traveler visiting a rural, isolated locale. The outsider is considered a worldly stranger who believes he is superior to the country bumpkins. However, he is often tricked or fooled by the local inhabitants. So this is a person who comes in, thinks that he or she is going to change the city and make it better, but the person doesn't know the town. The person doesn't know the inhabitants. The person doesn't know, quote unquote, the characters. It's like a person who writes about a particular area as a writer living in, say, Dallas, Texas, where we are right now, but they want to write about the Midwest, but they have never visited the Midwest. They don't know anything about the Midwest. They don't even have family in the Midwest to even glean wisdom from, but they want to write about the Midwest. So it's like a person like myself who wants to write about another country. Say I want to write about Ghana in a novel, but I've never visited Ghana. I've never interviewed anyone from Ghana. I don't know anything about Ghana other than the historical data or the State Department information about it or something like that. In order for me to write from a local color standpoint, I would need to put myself in the area so that I can understand it. Otherwise, I I would seem like no different than a worldly stranger sitting at my desk while I'm in America trying to write about another country. All right, local color writing is represented by characters referring to the area or the time as the good old days or the way things were. You will often hear your own parents talk like this, whether they grew up in the same city and state that you were born in. Um, it doesn't matter. It's just the way they talk. It's just the way their generation sees the world today. It's almost like they would rather still live in the good old days and with the way things were than to live in the present day. Stories of the Old South are filled with nostalgia of a bygone era. For example, the plantation myth is presented as an altered view, idyllic for both the master and the slave. So you'll see a lot of this in literary writing, where the master or the women of the family, um, they pride themselves being from the old South and owning a plantation, and by extension, owning slaves. And you'll see some of this type of thinking today in the 21st century. People really want to go back to that time. Well, going back to that time leaves them of personal responsibility, so that the responsibility of living life and managing life is placed on that slave instead of placed at the foot of the person who needs to take care of himself or herself by alone. Local color writers such as Charles Chestnutt deconstructs the plantation myth by depicting the power and intellect of slaves against their racist landowners. So we'll read about the passing of Grandison later. All right, local color writing is seen as a transitional type of writing from romantic style to realistic style. Local color characters are depicted realistically and humanely with ignoble traits. So they tend to swear, speak in regional dialect. They swat flies. They make mistakes. They're comical. They live in real life locations with customs and rules for behavior. Many of your local color writing works tend to focus on social expectations, political expectations, financial class expectations, and so you'll see that a lot. So an example of a regional dialect would be a um, New England dialect, and you can see this in different areas. If anyone who lives in New York knows the way a person from New York talks, anyone who lives in the South know the same. Anyone who lives in the West, there may be a mix because you have a mix of cultures, ethnicities, nationalities in the West. And then the North, everyone knows how the North or the Midwest speaks. So um, you'll have different types of thinking, ways, modes of behavior, rules for behavior per region, per locale. Local color writers depict stories as sentimental with a happy ending. Local color characters are often two dimensional and they either seek good or bad. And then local color writing presents American life and storylines as authentic experiences rather than the experiences of the British aristocracy. It moves literary writing from being a derivative of English British ideals to presenting the American experience. So this is how we began to transition as Americans from an over reliance on British idealism. We moved from or our perspective of the British and their literature as idealistic and to a more realistic style, meaning that I feel like the American Civil War woke everybody up. They had been living in some sort of fantastical, heroic, um, inauthentic understanding about how life really is. And the American Civil War, with all of its casualties, and is leading us into the industrial age, woke everybody up. So let's look at the literary style contributor to realism, regionalism, 1875 to 1895. So regionalism embodies more sophistication than local color writing. With regionalism, authors use one character, who is usually the protagonist, to present a narrative point of view from the protagonist's perspective, who tends to be perceived as empathetic. Regionalist writers will employ local color strategies to present characters of a locale or region. So local color writing does not necessarily have to act alone. You can incorporate local color writing in anything that you do. Regionalist writers present the psychological traits of a character through a universal lens. Writers present characters as three-dimensional, and then narrators offer plots that are less formulaic and predictable. Regionalist writers depict characters in the setting with less narrative objectivity compared to realistic stories where there is more objectivity. What you see is what you get, nothing more or contrived. All right, summing up the differences again. So, romantic writing focuses on the fantastical, the adventurous, the heroic. You're going to see a lot of that in the British literary tradition, and a lot of it when we try to adopt some aspect of it in our literary writing as Americans. And then realism is real, accurate imitation of life as it is, which is called truth in fiction, and then the ordinary citizen and actual. All right, here's some resources on realism, local color, and regionalism. So you can find a glossary of literary terms in both book and PDF formats. This is a standard book that we used when we were in college. So that's the Abrams source here, a glossary of literary terms. And then you can click this link and get access to um, the PDF of literary terms. And this is Works Consultant. So, Introduction to Realism, Definition of Realism and Naturalism, Glossary of Literary Terms, Writing for English Courses, Glossary of Literary Terms. So, you should be able to click um, within the PDF. All right, thank you very much for listening.